Last week, we discussed exactly what a business architect does. This week, we will continue as promised with the development and testing phase. Over to you, Maarten.
Great. So as you mentioned, we discussed all the specification things that we do before we start development. So, then we get to the next part, which is actually building what we said we're going to do. So this is something that was sort of tried and tested and evolved over many years. We tried something and then we improved it, whatever. Now, it may seem very basic, but the challenge when you do development and testing is to try and be consistent in terms of quality and following the same process over and over. Now, this requires a lot of discipline. We get back to that not fun word, which is discipline. And this is actually more my operations coordinator's baby in the business than mine, because I like doing the creative stuff and figuring out stuff. It's also, to me, quite interesting to improve things, but then I get bored. So my operations coordinator, an incredibly crucial step is doing project planning and doing project schedules. And this is often something that's neglected, but it's incredibly important. So why? Because it's like building a house. I mean, if you're not planning exactly who's going to do what by what date, obviously you're not going to meet the deadline. And nobody likes it when a deadline is not met.
Exactly.
So that's the reason why. And it's tedious because you need to do every single step, who's going to do it, and you need to be realistic. Is the specific developer going to be available from this and this date, taking into account, and the challenging part is taking into account his other responsibilities, because it's not just working on one project at a specific time. So this is more of an art that people actually realize to be realistic and to actually have realistic project plans, and everything's in flux. I mean, a specific developer will run into a challenging problem, but we've made a commitment. So you need to put in, enough buffer time so that you can under-promise and over-deliver. I think that's the big takeaways. Yes. We're not perfect, but we really try our best to under-promise and over-deliver, and because, I mean, your reputation is at stake. So, yes.
So that brings us to the sandbox. What exactly is the sandbox?
Yeah, so maybe I should just give a little bit of background. So most of the projects that we do are web applications. Now, if you have like a simple WordPress brochure website, for example, what you'll do is you'll use something that is called shared hosting. Now, shared hosting is pretty much a form of hosting where a lot of people's websites are on a single server, basically. So the problem with shared hosting is that somebody goes, if you, first of all, from a client perspective, you're dealing with a call center usually to resolve your issue if you have an issue, and they'll change settings on that server, and that might affect all the websites on it. So let's say you have a few hundred or a few thousand websites, and some administrator goes and changes settings, and it fixes a problem on one website and creates a problem on the other 999. Yes. And you as a client don't have control over it. Now, this is not such a big issue if you're just doing a WordPress website, because most of the people on that server is using WordPress, etc., etc. But if you're starting to do technical things, it can be very bad. So that is why we as Tech Genius have our own dedicated server. We don't actually use shared hosting when we're deploying web applications or systems. We have it on our own dedicated server. Now, on this dedicated server, before you make something available for the general public, it's a good idea to make it available in a sort of a test environment. So you give access to us internally, Tech Genius, obviously, and our testers, but we also give our clients sort of an early preview access to the sandbox. So the sandbox environment that's as close as possible to the real thing when we're going to deploy it. It's on the same server. It's almost everything's identical, except the database only contains dummy data. So you can go and create, records and go crazy, delete things and create things without, worrying about how you're going to affect, a live system that's in what we call production. So this is pretty much just a link to the where you can log into the sandbox to basically.
That brings us to issues.
Yeah, I mean, so we go through. We had a video before where we were talking about agile and the whole thing of doing things in smaller sprints. Now the whole idea is you want to catch issues as early as possible.
Yeah.
So what happens is you do a small sprint and you put it out there for the testers and the clients to test. Now, obviously, you're going to record issues. Now, issues isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it's still it's actually a good thing when you find issues, because you want to find them before your customers find them and your clients find them. So we actually use the same system we're using for project scheduling to actually keep track of the issues. And it's also very important to be disciplined. You know, every single thing, if it's a small cosmetic or a major bug, it needs to go onto the list, be prioritized, be assigned, etc. And obviously this issue list must be resolved before we go over to the next phase, which is then deploying to production. So this is the final website that the general public can actually can access.
Okay.
And that's how. So typically what we do is in the first iteration of testing on the sandbox, what you try and do is you try and identify all the issues. The second iteration is then of testing is then to make sure that all those issues have been resolved. The third iteration is just in case something wasn't resolved perfectly, and then you go over to the third iteration. It's just a safety net.
Okay.
In an ideal world, you will only have to go through 2 testing iterations, but it's just an extra safety net. So after the third iteration, if you've resolved everything and the client's happy, then we go over to production. Then we give our clients typically a 10-day acceptance period, just in case something pops up in production that you didn't see in Sandbox. Then we've got 10 days to report and we'll fix it free of charge. Yeah, so that's pretty much what that's about.
Quotes?
Yeah, quotes, obviously this is something that happens just after the roadmap. I just put it here. What we do is we put multiple, each time there's a quote, there's a sub bullet for this one, but it's good if you're doing working on a project. So I've got this project sort of summary. These are all the documents for a specific project. So it's nice if you quickly have a question or you want to see quotes that were done before. We've got an audit trail of all the quotes for quick access. Just click on the link. So this is just all the individual sprints, the quotes for each one.
Now, I suppose it's also got a place there, because if you've picked up an issue that you didn't quote before on, or something dramatically changes because of the client's got new requirements, then you need that process there as well.
Yeah, well, what will sometimes happen, let's say something went into production and there was a 10-day period and nobody picked up on it. If it's an urgent issue, we can just quickly, do it at our hourly rate. But if it's not very critical, all you do is you just put it into the next sprint. So you make sure it's resolved then. And the roadmap, we just listed basically in our roadmap document for the next sprint. That's easy as that. Then the other thing is also the not fun part is the checklist, because there's there are probably about 50 steps that we go through, the checks that we do every time we do a deployment to the sandbox and production. And we do this for every single deployment. It's a lot of technical behind the scenes things, but also you want to be consistent in your quality. So this is also where my operations coordinator comes in, and for every single, iteration, we go through all this quality checklist, and we actually have a documented an audit trail on each one. So it's also readily available with the quotes. You can see on a specific version, that we go through all the steps, and just in case some kind of issue pops up.
Well, that's it for today. And now at least we know what we can expect when we go to Tech Genius. So signing off from MF Consulting and from Tech Genius. See you next time.